Welcome to the Designated Drinker Show, the podcast that's raising the bar on craft cocktails. I am your host, Louise Salas, and with me, as always, is my very, very talented friend, who's my very own Lady Liberty, the Mixtress DC Gina.
Lady Liberty?
Yeah.
I feel like the green giant then. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
you are a giant amongst many.
Yeah. She's a leggy broad in the Hudson, so I'm into her.
She's leggy.
Yeah.
All right. So when I say the wall and immigrants in the same sentence, I would imagine you probably envision some kind of barrier that runs along our southern border. No?
Yeah, well, that's all you hear about was Trump's wall, so yes.
Yep. But did you know there's another American wall that actually pays tribute to, instead of bringing shame upon, the word immigrant? And that's the American Immigrant Wall of Honor, which stands just outside the Great Hall at Ellis Island, National Museum of Immigration. There are over 775,000 names inscribed across 770 stainless steel panels, and they form a semicircle, and it faces New York's lower Manhattan skyline. Now, an interesting thing about this, not all the immigrants who have been memorialized on this wall actually disembarked at Ellis Island. Truth is, anyone can honor their family heritage and recognize the adversity and hardship that many of their family members faced. So you can pay a mere $150 to have your family name inscribed, and all the money raised goes to fund the foundation's mission to restore and preserve the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. Now, there's something I have to admit, Gina, and don't give me the stink eye. All the times I have been in New York, I have never been to the Statue of Liberty or Ellis Island. Yeah.
Well, you definitely...
All the time.
Well, you definitely didn't grow up there because that's definitely something we did. But my great-grandparents came through Ellis Island. So my Aunt Teresa was the youngest of 10. And it was a big honor for my Finelli family to have their plaque at Ellis Island. So we all went.
Oh, cool. Cool. So your family name is on the wall? That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then we went to Flushing for food. So there you go. Because that's what we like to eat. So there you have it.
So when you were a kid, did they put you on the ferry every year, or like was it a
Circle Line?
Typical.
Get it correct. The Circle Line. Yes.
What is that?
The Circle Line is the name of the ferry that goes to Ellis Island and to Statue of Liberty.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
See, told you. I know not. So I have to correct that. I know. So let's go to New York. Go to Flushing's, get some food, and then we'll do the whole thing.
I'll put a cocktail together. We could drink it on the boat.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. It's illegal, but I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect day for you and I.
Yeah.
So let's get this show going, right? So all this talk about honoring your family heritage brings me to today's designated drinker. He is a chef, owner, restaurateur extraordinaire. He is Danny Lee. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So let's start off on the right foot. Get this show going in the right direction, will you? Please tell our listeners about your restaurants and how all this started for you.
Sure, yeah. So we opened up Mandu, which means dumpling in Korean, in 2006 with my mother and sister. My mom's always been a phenomenal home cook and chef ever since I was growing up. She had like little delis. And then later on, when I was in high school, she franchised a local Chinese restaurant through Charlie Chang, was a prominent local Chinese restaurateur. He won a bid to have a storefront in National Airport when that new kind of wing opened up in 1997. So my mom basically was running a Chinese takeaway in the airport for 10 years. But through that experience, she started cooking some Korean food and putting it on the menu. And even though it doesn't seem, that long ago, this is before Korean food kind of exploded in the States. And, you didn't see kimchi and Safeway or gochujang and like the Harris Teeter, So it was an experiment almost with us to see how people would react to having Korean food. And the airport's almost a perfect test base for that, because you have people from all walks of life traveling through those halls. And people were coming up, we're doing bulgogi bowls. And people were like, what is this? What is this exotic meat? I'm like, Dude, it's shaved ribeye with, soy and sugar and some garlic mixed into it. It's nothing crazy. But they read the name, they're just like, bulgogi. I'm like, oh, it's bulgogi. But, it's fine. Just eat. But that gave us the idea of, possibly opening up our own restaurant in the district. Because back then there weren't any full service, Korean restaurants in the city. So in 2006, our lease ran up and we made the family decision to open up Mandu. In between DuPont and Morgan on 18th Street. 4 years later, we opened up a second Mandu down in the Mount Vernon Triangle area of DC, close to Chinatown. And then I partnered with one of my best friends and one of the chefs I respected the most in the city, Scott Druno, who has dedicated his life to cooking Chinese cuisine. So he and I formed together to open up CHIKO, which stands for Chinese Korean. The first one opened up in July of 2017. It's more of a fast casual restaurant where half the menu is our fun takes on Chinese and Korean cuisine, where they kind of split the menu down in half. It's not really fusion. There's basically 50% of the menu is dedicated to the Chinese side, 50% is dedicated to the Korean side. And within those genres, we kind of tweak things to put our own spins on the dishes. And what's funny, well, I don't know if it's funny, but the same day we opened up that first CHIKO, the original Mandu, like my baby, my family's first restaurant, caught on fire and burned down.
That's crazy.
One of the most surreal experiences I've ever had in my life is to literally open up a new venture while your first restaurant, your first business is like smoldering, So,
and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So we had to make a really quick decision to see if we wanted to either walk away from the space or work out a deal with the new landlord and use, the insurance process to rebuild, which we decided to do. So it took 2 years, but that restaurant is now called Anju. So with the CHIKO locations, we now have 4. We have 3 in the DMV area and 1 in San Diego. And then now we have Anju as well. And then I still have the Mandu downtown.
So when you lost the first restaurant and you reopened under a new name, did you change the concept much? Yeah.
So first of all, it gave us an opportunity to do some remodeling that we thought we were going to do anyway. So there's nothing like a fire where it destroys everything, where you can kind of start anew. And I had played around with the concept of Anju actually at Mandu several years ago, where we hosted this monthly event where we invited some my good friends who cooked around the city to cook with me late night to do kind of like a fun experimental Korean, pop-up. Which kind of built steam. So ever since then, I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to open up a concept called Anju. So Anju literally translates to food meant to be consumed while drinking alcohol. So we wanted to be very bar heavy, but also we wanted to be very creative and not be held down by the notions of authenticity or tradition, which Mandu very much is. And I think there's a need for both, in any ethnic cuisine in the States. I think there's a need to have restaurants that are paying homage and tribute to the historical traditions of the cuisine and stay true to that and try to do the best versions of those beautiful dishes. But then on the flip side, there's also a need for restaurants that take that cuisine and progress and modernize it, to different levels and explore different possibilities of that cuisine, but all in all, it's still Korean, what I do, even though Anju is known to be a little bit more modern progressive. It's not like it's Korean American or modern Korean. It's still very much a Korean restaurant.
It's kind of funny how that becomes almost a taboo, maybe because there were so many bad versions of that. But I always find it really interesting when very traditional food takes on this new twist, and it just feels so creative. And again, to your point, it doesn't mean you're abandoning old traditions. You're just introducing it in a new way. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think, especially with European cuisines, most people don't have a problem if you see, nouveau French cuisine or, a modernized, Italian restaurant. But for some reason with Asian food, anytime a chef tries to not even recreate the wheel, but, just explore different avenues of that cuisine, then they're immediately labeled, fusion or, Americanizing or Westernizing that cuisine, and I'm very much against that.
When talking about that makes me think, when I lived in Hawaii, Asian food what fusion is the wrong way to describe it, because it's different, because it's in the islands and you have different influences, and it's years and years in the make, but no one thinks it's less than. It's the food, the Pacific Rim food just takes on its own space. So but it's also a culture that is mostly Asian population, so you do get a great mix.
Yeah, I was just in Maui 3 weeks ago.
Nice.
And it was amazing, driving around and tasting exactly how you just described, kind of the combination of several cultures, kind of combining together to create this own kind of novel cuisine. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Did you make it over to Maui Brewing while you were there?
No, we had a pretty packed schedule, but also it was, the first vacation we had taken in 16 months. So honestly, there are days where I just wanted to do nothing besides drink a pina colada next to the pool. So
exactly.
It looks beautiful. Trust me, I saw those pictures. I was like, good for you. You deserve it. There's a lot of pivoting during COVID. And also because of that came a little pop-up that you did, right? You haven't talked about that. That's still an ongoing pop-up out of your store. I egg you.
Oh, Fred, at CHIKO Capitol Hill. So Scott, always had this idea in his head of doing a breakfast concept where it's very simple, find really good bread, griddled very nicely, perfectly cooked fried egg, seasoned, and then your choice of protein, and so we tried to be as local as possible. So my family is friends with a couple that runs a Korean bakery in Annandale called O Bread. And they're an amazing Korean pastry shop, but they make delicious Korean style milk bread or milk loaves. So we actually get our bread through them. And that actually is 50% of our success there, is because the bread's so good.
It's so good.
We partner with Logan Sausage for our sausage meat. We do local specials where we've worked with, local smokehouses to get brisket. We'll do a crab special during the season, once coming up. But it's been something where we thought would only be, 2 to 4 weeks, where we're just testing it out. And we're going on several months now. And just keeps on building and building where, we might have a concept out of that. People are calling for more. So, we'll see where it goes. It's definitely been eye-opening for us. But yeah, we appreciate all the support for it. It exploded.
Yeah, it's great.
Do both of you think, because you're both in the profession, do you think that, it's hard to say anything was positive because of the pandemic, but do you think that the pandemic kind of opened that door to allow you, or maybe even forced you through maybe, to take risks and find new concepts and test them?
I think it caused every restaurant owner, manager, chef, whoever, caused everyone to be as creative as possible to survive. So it wasn't like, oh, this is an opportunity for us to have fun and, try this out. It was literally, what can we do within our spaces that can not just generate as much revenue as possible, keep as many people employed as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So it really was, I don't want to sound dramatic here, but survival.
That's why I was wondering if it was like a force through the door kind of thing. Sorry, Jean.
No, I don't think there's anything dramatic about what you said. It was survival. Like in a million years, nobody knew a restaurant relief fund was going to come or all that stuff. And, you have families to feed, and not just your own, but, people that work for you and they have kids, and this is their main source of income. And to think that you would just close and then leave everybody sorry. I think that wasn't an option. And I commend, the reason why I wanted Danny so badly to come on the show is because of all of the things that they've done. And the fact that they, talk about it, like they, pivoted, they opened, they slowly opened, they had their pickup, they had to go, they did it safely, they started IAGU. And now, Danny is, I believe, becoming one of the biggest voices to stop all the Asian hate crime and violence, which I feel is disgusting. But, you talk about survival of, COVID and all of that and everything that's happened to the Capitol. We're all in Washington, D.C. and everything you did every day made a difference on your bottom line. And when I buy bottom line is, I'm not talking about like I bought a car at the end of the year. I mean, like we were still in the red, but we made it and we could get to the next year. Do you know what I mean? And like and thank God for our loyal customers, because who knows, who knows what would have happened. But anyway, I'm not going to that's a whole other episode. It's very dark. And if that's the case, then I got to get the scotch out, and then we got to talk about it with scotch and change the episode.
But you did touch on something that I'd love to go down, and that is, so Danny is, when you said, let's bring him on the show, of course I do some research, and he's all over the internets, all over the media talk about you like you're not here, about, and I quote, it's, you have vowed to be relentless in your fight against racism. Can you please tell our listeners a little bit more about that, and especially about your EmbraceRace, easy for me to say.
Yeah, so first I want to say that the racism that's being talked about right now against the Asian American community isn't something new. This is something that we've been dealing with ever since we've been in the country, way since before I was born. And the unfortunate thing is that, it took COVID to really highlight these issues and to bring them to light. And it further emboldened a lot of people who were in the shadows and held these thoughts to their own household or in their own heads. They were further emboldened to come out and be very vocal against the Asian community for several reasons. And, I think throughout the pandemic, early on, in last May, you had the George Floyd protests, and especially in DC, that was a major turning point in this city, let alone the country. And, we tried to be, at least my wife and I tried to be as supportive and as part of it as possible, so we could really feel what was going on. So we went down to Black Lives Matter Plaza, almost every day. We brought down PPE. We actually made fried rice out of Mandu one day, so people could pick up, some nourishment on the way and just like eat it there, because there weren't a lot of food options there. But I feel like, being part of the community in the city, you really need to sometimes go out there and be in the middle of it to really experience what's happening in your community. And again, throughout that time period, the attacks against Asian Americans simultaneously started to increase. And, there were times where I felt helpless and I felt very depressed. I felt very sad about what was happening to our community, and it also caused me time to self-reflect and think back onto my childhood up until now, of all the microaggressions that I faced, living in a very, white world. And what I was saddened by was a lot of the silence that was happening, first from like the mainstream media, where you would see these attacks happening, but no one knew about it. So, you would only know about it if you followed sites like NextShark, which is like an Asian American based news source. So myself and, a lot of other Asian Americans started to repost those things to their followers, because there were a lot of people who had no idea. And every time we did, you would get so many messages from people being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. When did this happen? Or how could this happen? We're like, this has been happening for a year, like at least for a year in terms of the violent attacks. Again, racism has been happening forever, but in terms of these kind of bolder violent attacks, strictly racially based attacks, we're having for quite some time, but no one was talking about it. So we felt it was our duty to speak up for ourselves, because if our own community didn't speak up for, ourselves in terms of this issue, who's going to?
Exactly.
It starts with us. And so I decided to use whatever platforms I had to raise awareness issue number one, so that people knew it was an issue, to keep the conversation going. And then number two, I thought it was also equally important to realize that, yes, there is a highlight, or there was a highlight on racism against Asian Americans. That by no means means that racism stopped against every other community.
Yeah.
Like for some reason, people are like, oh, well, now racism took a turn from being racist against African Americans. Now it's only Asian. It is always affecting everyone.
Yeah.
And what I would go down these dangerous rabbit holes on the internet where I would see a lot of like fringe groups from all sides, for every different community, kind of blaming each other, right? Finger pointing, kind of playing the blame game. And I then thought it was really important to try to promote interracial solidarity, so that we could unify and show strength through our diversity, embrace our diversity, right? And help each other out, learn from each other so that we could combat the ultimate enemy, which is racism and honestly white supremacy in this country. And some of the systemic biases and systems that have been ingrained in our society to help other people realize what this problem is and how we can move forward. So I found this group called EmbraceRace, which is a wonderful organization founded by a couple, Melissa and Andrew. And their whole mission is to fight racism by providing tools to parents, teachers, educators, counselors to teach young children on anti-bias and anti-racist, issues. Through education, they feel like they can really shape, the next leaders of our society, and I'm a firm believer in that. And it's not just for one community, not just for Asians, not just for Asian Americans, not just for Latinos, it is as a whole, right? And I thought that was very important to showcase that. So we put together a dinner at Anju with a very diverse lineup of talented chefs. And we, in one night, raised $20,000 for EmbraceRace. And then through there, a lot of other chefs and a lot of other restaurant groups started doing their own initiatives, donating to EmbraceRace as well. I actually was in California for work at the San Diego CHIKO, and there's a group out there that did a 4-week-long series benefiting EmbraceRace as well. So again, it's been weird, being this vocal about it, but I think that also ties into the whole concept of being Asian American, especially for my generation in this country, is we were raised not to be vocal. We were raised to be docile and to acclimate in society and keep our heads down and study and become a lawyer and doctor and just, be a contributing member to society in our own quiet way, right? And what I now know is that we were programmed to do that to feed into the model minority myth, and that's why I continue to be vocal, which is why I said I'll be relentless, is in the hopes that if I can inspire, a fellow Asian American or even non-Asian, right, to be vocal and to stand up for us, right, to stand up for these issues and to acknowledge that we have problems and to, use whatever methods they possibly have in their arsenal to combat racism. I find that to be a win.
Absolutely.
But even now, like when I went out to San Diego for that dinner, that was on a Tuesday night. So I flew out Monday. So literally I was in town for 4 hours, and then I was outside of a bar with a friend who happened to be Korean American as well. And I'm in San Diego, which is known to be a very liberal, Southern California city. And I got called, this guy walked through the parking lot, was like, "What are 2 Japs doing outside my bar?" And it's not even his bar. And we're like, what? It was such like a bold, like abrasive comment to make. And also, first of all, wrong term. Second of all, that's like a term that you haven't seen since you saw like a black and white documentary of World War II, And then he was, he's like, "Oh, I'm just like, I'm just screwing with you guys." Like, well, that's a weird way to introduce yourself, And then he's like, "Oh, I used to do business in Japan and Korea." And I was like, "Oh my God, here we go." And he follows that statement up with "what the rest of you flat-faced people." And I was like, oh my God, man, So apparently he's like known like locally to be,
Abrasive.
an abrasive person. Yeah. So he got kicked out of the bar, and actually he's been kind of banned from that bar and from several other restaurants after this happened. Which, I applaud, the local restaurant and bar association there for doing that. But I told that story the next night at, the dinner we were doing, and I stopped telling the story because I saw the audience members like mouths kind of drop open, like they're shocked that could happen in their town, So I was like, the amount of surprised faces I see here means that there's a problem.
Absolutely.
It means that you think your community is immune to this. And this is why we're doing this dinner. This is why I am advocating as much as I am, so that there's no way for us to progress as a society if as a society we don't identify the problems that we have, right? We don't acknowledge that there is a problem in the first place. And that is why I'm being vocal, is for us to realize that there is a problem, so that once that acknowledgement happens, we can together come up with a solution.
You mentioned something early on in that when you were talking about being taught to be more docile, being taught not to talk about it. My father was Mexican, came to my grandparents moved to the States when he was 3. It's like 100 years ago, very different United States. But my father would never talk about it because then it showed weakness in his mind.
Yeah.
So you never acknowledged. And it was crazy because he would be like, well, that doesn't happen to me, meaning himself. Although, and he would almost deny that racism, although he was incredibly racist himself. But he would deny that not deny, it's just that would not admit that those things happen, because we would have these arguments. I was that daughter that challenged it all. And I would say, well, they say those same things about us. And he's like, oh, no, they don't say that about Tony Mendoza or his children. And I'm like, yeah, they do. It was that it was that denial that my father, that was his rule. You never admit it, because then it was showing a sign of weakness, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that's the other part of this is that, a lot of Asian Americans, from my generation, think that showing vulnerability is a bad trait, right? Like asking for help is wrong. And we're at the point right now where, as a community, we need to ask for as much help as we can get. And it's okay to ask for that. It's okay to show vulnerability. It's okay to show that we're not well. And not just with what's happening now. I think in general, I think there's been a societal change where it is fine to say that you are not okay, right? Yeah. And that you need help. And, the more we can, as a society, embrace that, notion, I think we can go a long way, not just racism, but for mental health issues, et cetera.
I think that you also mentioned, the enemy here is not another person. It's a mindset. It's racism itself. It's hatred itself. Mm-hmm. That's a major hurdle, but you're right. It's going to take all of us to acknowledge and understand and be empathetic to each plight.
Yeah. And, I don't have the answers. The amount of calls and messages I get from people, right? Honestly, a lot of white people.
Sorry.
And, kind of my, no, you're not one of them. But, fellow restaurant owners or, managers or leaders or whoever that will literally ask me, how do I end racism? I'm just like, oh my God, what kind of question is that? Like, if I had that answer, I would win a Nobel Peace Prize, that is a ridiculous question. Or they're like, how do I stop the hate? I'm just like, you can't, but we can make progress. And what I tell everyone is it starts with direct conversations, right? Have these uncomfortable conversations with your staff, right? Have these conversations with your inner circle, and bring it up and force them to acknowledge, that there are problems in our society.
I think it's also just starting with yourself too, realizing where because we all have them. We all have prejudiceness against certain things, things that you can't control, or there are things that, and I think the conversation first starts with just within yourself to realize where is that within you.
But there are a lot of people who, for some reason or another, do not want to self-reflect and realize that
it's hard.
They might have systemic bias, right, within them. And they're like, oh, well, I have friends of all races. That means I'm not racist or I'm not prejudiced, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a very dangerous thought, is that, systemic racism doesn't mean that, that everyone in society is going around calling each other racial slurs every day. Systemic racism is something that's ingrained in our society. It is ingrained in how you walk down the sidewalk, right? It is ingrained how you move or not move out of the way when someone's approaching you, there's simple things like that in your everyday life that you don't realize are a product of bias, and that's what we need to realize.
Glad it's not a big deal.
Yeah, no. I'm raising 2 kids, and I think about that a lot because I grew up in New York and I grew up in a very mixed community. And wasn't quite like that where I grew up, and I think about where my aunt lived in Flushing, and I told you my family immigrated here from Italy. You saw a lot in New York growing up as a kid, and I try very hard now to make sure I point out things to my children. And I said, that's not right. You don't do that. And Black Lives Matter and all of that. They were like, they didn't understand like what that meant. And I really tried to explain to them that, they're like, all lives matter, Mom. And I said to her, I was like, what we're trying to say is that you need to appreciate that Black lives need to be heard. And talking about, and one of the things, Danny, that like gets to me the most is how do we, and I'm not saying you have the answer, but raising your children and giving them the respect of culture is a big way, at least what my parents raised me, to respect people's culture was a big way to take down the walls of what being racist is. Because understanding culture and where people come from is a big hurdle. And at least in my family, that's how it was. And I'm trying very, very hard for my children to not see it that way. I want them to see it as embrace how beautiful it can be, embrace all of the people that are around you, and not just like, for one reason or another. But I get nervous sometimes thinking like, maybe I don't understand enough. You know what I mean? So I read more, or I listen to my friends, or I see what you're doing, or I see what my friends are doing for African Americans and Black Lives Matter and different groups. And I try to learn from them. But I think with EmbraceRace that you're doing, the schools, and I don't know how to do that, but to get younger kids together is the only way we're ever going to see it like start to dissipate in some time frame, because it took from the beginning of time to now to build. So it'll take time for it to dissipate.
Yeah.
But I don't, I wish there was a way to have a pointer and say, you have to suck it up, and you're going to have to listen to this conversation, and you're going to have to do it, and you're going to have to find your way in order to teach. Like, all these mothers have children. And, unfortunately, in parts of our country and our city that we live in now and everything, people don't think the way that we think. And I kind of like, I want EmbraceRace to like really follow up with that, like go to the schools and like, how do I put them in the school here where I live, and, what does that mean? Is there a material? Is there a class that we could teach online for kids so they begin to understand each other? Because it's so easy for them to fall into wherever they are. And it doesn't matter if you live in an all Black community or an all Asian community or an all white community. It's very easy to listen to what your parents are doing or saying. So is the school a good way to try to eliminate some of that you may be hearing at home?
It is a good way, but that it is very idealistic for us to think that, the public school system will implement these changes. I mean, for years, the African American community has been trying to push for more inclusion in school classes, right? And just in public schools in general, to spend more time talking about the history of African Americans and some of the atrocities that happened to their community through slavery, right? And civil rights movement up until now. And instead of just having like a 2-page thing being like, oh, slavery happened, but then it ended, we're good now,
Yeah.
Like it is such a false narrative that's taught in schools. And I don't think it is anything progressive or left-leaning or whatever to include that factual history in our schools, right? But the fact that it isn't is a problem. And the fact that there are so many parents that rebel against the thought of that being taught to their children in their schools signifies a huge problem in our society, right? And That's what I'm saying. It's not. It's something that we cannot fix tomorrow. But if we can keep the conversation going and keep the debate going, where we're putting things into simpler terms that aren't polarizing, but honestly just explaining on a commonsensical level why this is wrong and the culture this breeds. I think that's where we can make a dent. But again, it's a very polarizing issue, obviously, and it's very divisive. And if you're using anger to combat anger, it's only going to get worse, So I think it's time to switch the conversation and be smart about it and say, okay, how do we actually break through some of these people's barriers, right? Where we can actually get to their heads and make them think.
I think it's interesting when you talked about sharing culture and it's racism isn't white against any other color. It's throughout all races and all cultures, unfortunately, or as I see it is so anyway. But I think when you start introducing, knowing people, like even as simple as I'm sure for kids, when you're teaching them cuisine or different traditions and learning different cultural behaviors and tendencies, I think what that does is it starts to break down the barrier, especially in children, because they just learn these are just other people. They're just people that have different ways, and and a child is just a sponge. Instead of filling them with hate, you're filling them with understanding and appreciation for another culture. I think that, and it's not at a space that it has to be empathetic, or it's more of just an absolute absorption space where they're just really being exposed to new things. And there's no reason to be sorry because they're just learning, and they're just learning about new things. That for me is very promising.
Let's have a drink.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Can we have a drink? I feel like I need a drink. I'm getting I don't know. I'm like on the verge. I think I'm on the verge of tears for some reason, and I don't really know why.
I feel like I'm gonna really screw this up, Gina.
No, it's so easy. It's the easiest drink ever. All right. So we're gonna make a cocktail, and I have to tell you, I have the privilege of knowing Danny, but I wanted to make a drink that was kind of something that you would sip and enjoy, and it had many layers. And for me, bourbon or whiskey is something that has many layers, and champagne. And I think the cocktail was very kind of thought out for you because it has something that's the bourbon in it, which is like a really rich and lovely thing, and then it has champagne, which means to lighten it up. And I call it the Soulful because I really feel like, Danny, I feel like that what you're doing is all from the insides. So I made this cocktail for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's silly. I don't normally do that. I normally have some sort of cocktail I want to make, but like I really thought about you and like what I kind of envisioned for what this would taste like. If it was a way I could describe what you've been doing over the last time. So I hope you enjoy it or you hate it. I don't know, but we're gonna make it. So here we go. So we're gonna use 1 ounce of Maker's Mark, and we're gonna put this in our blender. And if you don't have a blender at home, no problem. You could definitely just shake this over in a shaker tin, shake it over ice, and then you'll pour the champagne after. And then we're gonna use 1 ounce of ginger syrup. 3/4 of an ounce of ginger syrup. And we are going to do 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. And I know that if you listen to the show, obviously fresh is best. Take the time, squeeze the lemon. Please don't buy lemon juice from aisle 5 in a yellow container. Okay? So we're gonna squeeze that in. There's a big lemon today.
Those are so gross.
What, the big lemons? Or the plastic ones?
The lemon, yeah, those and the lime ones are so bad.
Yeah, you wanna know what's really embarrassing? They're called ciciglia. So it's like from Sicily, and it's just so sad to me. Anyway. All right, so we have all that in there, and now you're gonna take your champagne, you're gonna pour that in, and you're gonna pour about 3 to 4 ounces. And I wanted to say this is another alternative. If you want to make a lighter cocktail, or you want to have happy alcohol, you could definitely use soda water in there as well, or seltzer. Then you're gonna use about 1.5 cups of ice, and then we're just gonna put it on top of our blender, and we're gonna blend. And what you're looking for is a nice loose consistency. So it's a pourable drink. And If it's not able to pour out of the blender, then you might need to add a little bit more alcohol to loosen it up. Nothing wrong with that. I'll always add a little bit more alcohol, but let's blend. So let me see your consistency. What do you got, please? Did you blend today?
Oh, I think I'm good this time, Gina.
Oh, mine, I definitely needed more ice.
Let me see. No, let me see yours, Danny.
No, I need more ice.
Yeah, I probably needed more ice too. I think I put too much champagne in mine.
Okay, just a little bit. So you want to do about like a cup and a half. Cup.
Gotcha.
That's okay. You know what it is? You can't measure the champagne. It's kind of like an eyeball thing, right?
But this still tastes
Sorry.
delicious though.
Listen, that's all it means is you got to make a drink for somebody else. Just add a little bit more ice. So you're gonna garnish this with a sprig of mint, and if you're lucky enough, and like maybe you have a grocer that has verbena, or you have a verbena tree, or your neighbor has a verbena plant, and you could steal a little verbena with this is also really lovely. And I wanted to put some of the flowers on it. My verbena was flowering this morning.
How pretty.
So
there we go.
Yeah, so I just kind of put that on there. And verbena and mint, all of that's kind of in the same family. So, it's just really there for the nose.
Because the nose knows.
You need to put a little floater of the Angostura bitters on the outside. And Danny just did it, and I did not.
I follow the recipe, chef.
Sorry, you follow the recipe way better than I did. So we're going to add our Ango around the side. That's going to give you a little bit of the bitter with the aromatics and the mint, and you should be good to go. So there we go.
Oh, that is delicious.
You like it?
Oh, that is really refreshing.
You can get brain freeze though.
Frozen champagne.
Yeah.
My favorite thing to do is just dump champagne into a frozen machine for a party with like a little bit of lemon and or orange juice, doesn't matter, and you freeze it. So good. But I'm not happy you like it, Danny. I was like, I want to make a drink.
Oh, that is very, very refreshing, especially, it's a bit warm. So this is definitely cooling me down.
Yeah, welcome to DC Summers.
Yep. DC Summers.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. Since you're chefs, I have herbs that are blooming, just like yours, Gina. Can you cook with those, or should you trim them and just put them back in the dirt?
Depends on what it is, but if you have basil, you need to deadhead it and take the basil flowers, the seeds off, because otherwise your plant's gonna die. Because once it makes its seeds, that's what it's intended to do, and then it makes the basil really woody.
Gotcha.
So if you pinch them before it's time, they'll just keep producing. So nice. I don't know about all the herbs.
Gotcha.
What were you gonna say, Danny?
I was gonna say, if you're worried about waste, right? Because you do need to, trim your plants and pick them so that your plants remain healthy, can continue to grow. You might have instances where you're left over with a ton of extra herbs. There are definitely different ways to preserve them so you can use them for later. You can dry them and then turn them into a powder, and use them for different seasonings. You can buy, there are food dehydrators now that are very affordable. They can buy all over the internet where you can dehydrate herbs. And again, that's another way to enhance certain dishes where you can reconstitute them when you're doing a saute, for instance, right? And you can have dried basil or dried oregano, whatever, that will enhance the dish, or a cocktail.
Oh, Danny, I'll be dropping off a lot of things to you to make some powders. I hope that you're excited. Because in like one more week, it's time to go and take off all the potato flowers off the potatoes. And I didn't realize when I planted a row of potatoes, just how many plants that was. So, yeah, I have a giant garden now, and I put in a whole bunch of stuff, and it's way too much, and it's a lot of things we don't actually eat, so it's going to be fun. So I'll be handing things away to people like, oh, I hope you enjoy all of this eggplant.
See, Gina, I just thought you were inviting Danny and I up for a big Sunday dinner.
Oh, no, I'm going to bring it to you. Oh, yeah, you can come up and do that, too. But I'll be like, oh, take all of this home. All right.
It's time for you to do some barkeeping.
Yes, it is. So if you want your tips, tricks, or how-tos for the cocktails, you go to Designated Drinkers Show, and we'll be sure to include how to get to Danny's restaurants. And again, it's CHIKO, Anju, and Mandu, as well as his pop-up I Egg You, his Capitol Hill location. And then, of course, how to contribute to EmbraceRace will be there. And any dinners that will be up and coming, Danny, please share with us so we can post. And any way that you want us to get the word out, what's going on.
Yeah, we'll do.
And then also, you'll also be able to check out our episode notes to get all that same information. Links will be right there for you. The other thing we'll make sure we put there is Gina's home address. So when she makes us that big Sunday dinner, all of our listeners can join us.
That's awesome.
You want to drive here, everyone can come here. I'll tell you that. All right. So there's one last question for you. And this is our fun question. So this is how we know if you listen to the show or not. So in this day and age, everybody, identifies himself with some sort of spirited animal. And you might identify yourself with, I'm trying to think of a good one for you, Danny. Something funny. And you might identify yourself with the mythical nymph, and you really embrace, running around the forest and creating a little bit of havoc. So if you could be one spirit ingredient, either for cocktail or for food, what would that ingredient be and why?
Oh my God. I was not expecting a question like that.
First thing that comes to mind is usually the best answer.
I don't know why, but I was thinking of shiitake mushroom.
Okay.
Because it runs around the forest and causes havoc? I don't know.
No, it's quiet, but it provides, a lot of flavor, and it's subtle, right? It's the base for a lot of different, soups, stocks, dishes that, it's kind of just always in the background. And I think that's kind of how I like to be, is, hands in many things, but kind of, taking a step back into the background.
I like
That's
that
awesome.
answer. I do. I like it. It's a base. A base is good.
Ooh, got through that one.
Well, Danny, I want to say thank you so much for spending so much time and enlightening us and giving us ways to contribute to a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
No, thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The Designated Drinker Show is produced by Missing Link, a podcast media company that is dedicated to connecting people to intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Also in the Missing Link lineup of podcasts is Rodger That, a podcast dedicated to guiding you through the haze of dementia, led by skilled caregivers Bobbi and Mike Carducci. Now, if you're looking for a whole new way to enjoy the theater, check out Between Acts, an immersive audio theater podcast experience. Each episode takes you on a spellbinding journey through the works of newfound playwrights, from dramas to comedies and everything in between. Find Missing Link's League of Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, and review the shows. Your review helps our shows reach new audiences. To find out more about Missing Link, visit missinglink.company. That's missinglink.company.